Hey, Alvin, thank you so much for sharing your story. You're right, I didn't know a lot of what you overcame to get where you are. Um, and I still don't, because I don't know on a day-to-day basis when you were a college student or a graduate student, what held you up? What lifted you up? What supported you? And what could we do?
Sure. This, of course, will be unique to me and my own experiences. But I was fortunate. I attended a large public state institution that had a large number of black students. There were over 3,000 black students at my predominantly white institution of nearly 30,000 students. So we made up about 10% of the population. And so I could draw back to that community in many instances, particularly when I felt slighted or experienced microaggressions, even though I didn't have the language for it. When I was in college, I certainly experienced those kinds of experiences. I'm also very intrinsically motivated, and someone telling me I can't is exactly what I need to know that I can and to keep pushing. And then, as I noted before, I have a very strong family who's always been in my corner and has always been driving and pushing and has always told me that I had the capacity to do more than anyone in our family had done before I came along. And fortunately, I believe them and believe that about the generations in my family that have come after me and continue to provide that. When I think about it in the context of sort of my daily lived experiences here at Seattle U, my experiences aren't that different from what our students of color experience. I certainly experience microaggressions. I certainly experience racism. And I certainly am often finding myself asking myself, is that question rooted in someone's sheer sort of lack of knowledge and lack of understanding, or is that about who I am and who I am racially and ethnically? And that is a question that I will likely continue asking for the rest of my life because I've experienced so much racism and so much discrimination, not just in the context of my work here, but in my life. And so there's a bit of caution that I have to approach all of these things with. But ultimately, for me, it draws back to my community, my relationships in my family, my friendships, and those folks really being a central part of helping me know, as the title implies, that I am enough, that I've always been enough, and that I will always be enough.
So a little follow-up then. I may have the mirror image of your story, which is I didn't get a societal message. I'm chronically white and male, and once I was in, I looked like I belonged there. Grew up in a really messed up family, so got pretty much the opposite message. So I'm wondering, what do you do with students who, whatever their background is, to support that, but particularly if you're getting both messages? How do those students get the support they need?
Sure. I think, first and foremost, when thinking about supporting students, it's the recognition that each student is unique and individual, and that they're not this collective of just students, which we can sometimes fall into, just thinking about, the larger body that exists. But every single student has their own unique sort of needs and their own background and experiences that they bring with them to Seattle University. And it's important that we understand that and we embrace it, and that we give students the ability to show up authentically and in ways that are meaningful for them, and not defined by us as an institution. It can sometimes be uncomfortable to create that kind of space for students, but it is critically important to students having the ability to be successful at Seattle University and to move out of this space of surviving their college experience and into this space of thriving. That if we're all working towards trying to create an environment that really is about giving students the best chance at thriving, the best chance at success, and really the ability to show up authentically, then we will be a better campus for it, and our students will have the ability to engage in this education in a way that makes sense for them. The other piece that I offer is thinking about the ways that allies can show up in this conversation. So certainly I can engage with students of color on a day-to-day basis, and I could likely spend every day, every minute of every day doing that. And I actually love doing that, but I also know that I have other obligations that I need to meet on this campus. And so it's critically important that allies to students of color on this campus also understand the role that you play, and that there may be some caution on a student's part or on a faculty and staff member's part in engaging in those relationships based on the tapes and the schemas that are playing for them based on their lived experiences and their background, but that it is up to you and up to my colleagues here in the room to think about how you can create those trusting relationships that are built around understanding, built around awareness, and built around your knowledge and skill building. That you may not necessarily get it right the first few times, but if you keep working towards it, that will come, and that you and our campus will be much better for it.
So students of color, we know, obviously have very unique experiences, and more specifically, I think, for me, obviously, as a Black student, you kind of spoke to the idea of otherness and how, we talk about a lot of times in the conversation how a student of color can feel like an other when they come into the education, arena. But can you speak to supporting students who may feel otherness in their own communities as a result of trying to pursue education? Because that's something that I've dealt with as a young child. You're whitewashed because you like to do your homework and speak a certain way. And so how do you speak to students that might feel like, I want to pursue an education, but maybe my community doesn't understand that? Sure.
There are two things that more immediately come to mind. The first is a book that I read many years ago by Ellis Coase called My Skin is My Sin. And quite a bit, he's an African-American journalist and writer, and he talked about this concept of whiteness or acting white, which I'm imagining many of the people of color in this room for certain might have some encounters with, or at least have some knowledge of. And it's something that I dealt with quite a bit growing up, and to some degree still deal with, because my family is still very much rooted in the community that I grew up in, and my circumstances are far beyond that existence. And so what I offer is, again, grounded in my own sort of response and experiences, is that my Blackness is not defined by the community that I grew up in, nor is it defined by higher education. I was born Black. That is a fact, period. You can't take that away from me. And there are varying ways in which Blackness is manifest and displayed. And this is one way, my way is another way, your way is another way. But none of that equals acting white. For me, so I don't have a Southern accent. And I legitimately grew up in North Carolina. And part of the acting white was, you changed your voice to fit with the white standard. Well, no, I changed my voice because I was interested in acting and journalism, and I was interested in being marketable. And I took courses. Now, give me a week in North Carolina, and it comes back. It's really clear. And so whiteness certainly exists, but it doesn't exist within me. Like, I'm not white. It's like, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm not.
Thank you, Dr. Alvin. And I think before I speak, I want to first acknowledge you in the presence of others. As a fellow African-American man, you do not get an opportunity to hear from someone like you speak in the manner in which you did. And I think that it's not just information, it is something that's transformative and has validated my experience here on campus as an employee. So thank you so much for being honest and that transparency. And when I think about my question, I think about the ways in which so much of what you shared is so much in me. And obviously going through education, nowhere, at no point in school did they say that you were a possibility, that you existed. So to see the ways in which you showed up, but you've maintained a strong connection to your uniqueness and your authenticity allows for me to say, okay, one day I can be like you and be the way that I am. So that's really big. But when I think about the trajectory and what that means, it's been very difficult because on one hand, there's the educational piece, and then the other hand, there's the modeling the behaviors. And it's hard because in today's political and current generation, like the information is out there. And I think there's this ignorance in which you're still waiting for others to educate as opposed to just accepting people the way that they show up. So I'm struggling to go, all right, I've sort of directed all this energy of trying to educate other individuals to our experiences versus how do we focus on ourselves, how do we find validation in our experiences, and then with the hopes that others can begin to then see themselves and us represented as opposed to us having to educate. So when you think about the trajectory of your career, maybe those moments in which you felt like, I don't have time to keep teaching. I just want to just do the work. What like pushed you through? What got you through that?
So quite honestly, it was the faces of my students. That's what pushed me through. I knew that if I didn't take some responsibility for that, then it would be on their shoulders. And to some degree, it is still on their shoulders. But the more I embrace it and the more I take it on and the more I accept it as a part of my role, the easier it is for them and the healthier the climate is. Now, I also know that there's only one version of me. The Alvin you get here is the same Alvin you get at home. Maybe a little bit more comfortable and a lot less dressed up like this, but the same person. My values are the same. My beliefs are the same. My ideals are the same. And one of the things that I strongly believe in, and I learned this from my mom, is in the role that I play in breaking down walls and barriers for others, and in particular, those who are from the communities that I'm from. And so when I think about my role in the context of my work at Seattle University as it relates to teaching and raising awareness for others, it is burdensome, and it is an additional tax that is placed on me and others who look like me. But the question that I consistently ask myself is, if not me, then who? And it doesn't mean that it's easy, and it doesn't mean that I can go into it with positivity every single time, although my affect is glass half full pretty much always. But I do it. And again, I do it drawing back to what I said at the very beginning, because I see the faces of my students. And I know that by doing it, I'm helping them get across that stage.